I just had the best month I ever had in my business, $550,000 in revenue in the month of October. And I know everybody can just put up a screenshot. I know there's a lot of fake gurus on YouTube, a lot of people talking about senseless stuff. They never show you their numbers, but I don't want to be like that. And here I'm going to do something that I don't usually do because I don't like doing, but you can see right there. Let me get this to focus up. That's my Stripe right there. Let me refresh it for you. Let me do October 1st. You can see it right there. October 1st to October 31st. There you go. You can see. Let me see. Let me dang it again. $556,000 from October 1st to October 31st. So counting today as well. There you go. And I'm not making this video to flex, truly. I'm making this video to showcase to you how important money truly is. Most people think of money to just buy monetary stuff, but money gives you experiences. The experience of being able to speak at Mar-a-Lago, the experience of being in the front row seats of a UFC fight, the experience of actually being able to travel the world and doing all the things that you need to do, be it help other people, help your family, friends, and just experience the world for what it has to offer you. And I'm not the only person who can get results such as this. I'm just a small fish in a big pond if you want to take a look at the grand scheme of things, right? And I understand that. But this stuff works because people just like you, software developers just like you, are able to see similar results using the same exact methods that I talk about, right? And you can see all of them here. So let's just jump straight into it and get started on how you can make an obscene amount of money as a software engineer. Now, first and foremost, I want to emphasize something. Whenever you start a project or you want to start a business, I know people like to be optimistic about it, but you should first tend to look at the things that you shouldn't be doing, or in fact, what you should do to fail. So in this case, if you don't want to make an obscene amount of money as a software engineer, then you should not have an exit plan for your 9 to 5, avoid startups and equity offers, say no to entrepreneurship, limit networking for your career growth, and stay in the same exact role. The reason I want to start off with this is for you to understand that with a salary, you will never, ever, ever, ever be rich. And I can say that wholeheartedly for 100%. Let me show you why. I live in Los Angeles. The average software engineer, and this is actually a pretty high average, makes $137,000 a year. After taxes, they're left with $7,754 per month. Now let's calculate the average cost of living in LA. And keep in mind, this is a low estimate, right? I haven't seen anywhere that you can get a house or a rental for $1,855, right? Even one bedrooms where I live cost minimum $2,400, if not even more, right? So this is a very conservative estimate. This 3437 is a very conservative estimate, right? So we're left with $4,317. This doesn't include any trips, anytime we go out to eat, any leisurely activities, our friends, family, kids, wife, children, right? None of these stuff. This $4,370 is what we have. And in a year, this comes out to $51,804. Now, the average person, I would say even 99.9% of people in this situation would never be able to actually save this entire money, right? Over the course of a year, save $51,804. But let's assume you save that money and you invest it into the stock market, right? You get an average of 8% return year over year, right? And after 10 years passes, while reinvesting the gains back into the stock market, you're left with $810,263. Guess what? After 10 years, you can't even afford the car you always dreamed of having as a kid. Do you think that makes sense? Is that how the world, quote unquote, should work? Obviously not, right? This car now sits about at $1.6 million. It would take me minimum 10 to 15 years, more like 20 years of working every single day from 9 to 5 for me to be able to afford this car, considering I don't have any other purchases. I don't make any other purchases outside of my cost of living. Now, you might say, I don't care about luxuries. Not a problem. Replace this car with a house. Replace it with something else that's more dear to you, right? Don't we all want the finer things in life? Why shouldn't we have them, right? As a result, you need to understand that with a regular 9 to 5 salary, it doesn't matter even if you're working at FANG, you will never, never, ever be rich. The only exception is if you get equity, which we'll talk about later. So now that you understand that a 9 to 5 will never get you rich, you also need to understand that you're not financially rich because you underestimate the importance of leverage. You see, leverage is extremely important. In fact, I would say it's the most important thing that has to do with your success. If we were to define it, it's essentially doing more with less effort. Pretty easy to understand, right? And Archimedes has a very good quote that talks about leverage. He says, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world," right? So if we were to look at the definition, doing more with less effort, we're able to lift the entire world, right, with just a lever. How crazy is that? And this is technically, scientifically possible if we had the conditions to meet this. Obviously, we don't, but theoretically, it is possible, right? And the biggest problem with us software engineers is that we fail to recognize leverage outside of programming. And this is our greatest strength, but also our greatest weakness. We spend so many years trying to hone our skills, so focused on programming that we tend to kind of tunnel vision when it comes to other forms of leverage. And once again, this overemphasis on programming is the exact reason we overlook the other forms of leverage. And it doesn't matter whether it's junior developers or senior ones, we all make the same mistake. And I don't want you to misunderstand. Programming is still important, but it's only a prerequisite, right, to do what we do. You cannot be a software engineer if you don't know how to program, right? So when I say a good software engineer, I'm already assuming you have the prerequisite of being a good programmer, right? And I always like to say a good software engineer is a good programmer, but a good programmer is not a good software engineer. And you need to understand this. Okay, that's good and all. So now we know that we can't be rich the regular 9 to 5, right? Traditional path fails us. We know that there are other forms of leverage outside of programming that we might not be familiar with. So what should we do, right? How do I get obscenely rich? Well, we first have to understand what the other forms of leverage actually are, right? And there's really 4 main types. Code leverage, which we're all familiar with, capital leverage, labor leverage, and media leverage. So obviously, I'm not going to talk about code leverage too much because we spend years studying it, learning how to program, and as software engineers, we're pretty much familiar with it, right? So let's take a look at the other forms of leverage. Let's start with capital leverage. Capital leverage is essentially using your financial resources to multiply your potential returns, right? So a good example of this is if you, for example, let me move my face over here. If you go to the bank and say, hey, give me $1 million to scale my business. Let's say you need the money for marketing spend or whatever the case. You just need $1 million, right? The bank says, okay, gives it to you, and 5 years later, you're now making $5 million. So what was the ROI? Well, you got $1 million, and 5 years later, now you're making $5 million, right? That was your ROI, it was 5x, right? And this is capital leverage. You use capital to increase your returns. Now, labor leverage is quite similar, right? Except instead of money, it's you use other people's time, effort, and skills to achieve more than you could possibly do alone. Good example of this would, let's say you now have the money, you made the company, right? You're thinking of scaling it, and you see Bob. You're like, hey, Bob, come work for me. Come send cold emails for me, and you'll get a percentage of the deals that are closed. Bob says, okay. So now what you have is labor leverage, right? Before you were a one-man show. You couldn't dedicate 100% of your time to cold emails. But now you have Bob who can dedicate 100% of his time to specifically cold emails. So now your entire business is doing something that you could never do alone because you have another person now helping you. Labor leverage. Next up is media leverage. Media leverage is probably the simplest to understand because it's the closest to code leverage. I'll dive into that later. But it's essentially creating content that can reach and influence a large audience over time with minimal ongoing effort. So let's say me, right, Bago, and then you, the viewer, you clicked on this video to watch it. The video, how to make an obscene amount of money as a software engineer, right? And then you liked and subscribed. But it doesn't matter if you watch this video now, if you watch it 2 days from now, if you watch it a month from now, if you watch it a year from now, this video is always going to be up. I made it one time, I spent energy on it one time, and for years and eons to come, right, this video will always be available for you to watch and consume. And thousands of you can watch and consume this video. You can replay it, rewind it as many times as you need, right? I don't need to be there with you in the same space. I'm talking once here and thousands of people can see it. The reason I said it's similar to code is because code is very similar. Somebody can make the code, right, the app or whatever the case, and thousands of people across the world can use it. They don't need the developer to constantly be there tailoring to them, right? And now you might have an interesting thought in your mind. Okay, we talked about the 4 forms of leverage, right? is there a way we can possibly combine all four to make an insane amount of money? Well, good thinking, because you actually can. And it's called entrepreneurship, right? That's essentially what entrepreneurship is. And we as software engineers actually have an overwhelming advantage in entrepreneurship. And if you don't believe me, let's take a look at that. So let's think of us software engineers as characters in a video game. And let's take a look at our stat chart. You know how in video game you have like stats for different characters like dexterity, intelligence, agility, and then there's numbers? Think of it now, except in the real world, we have these exact stats. And instead of like dexterity and intelligence, instead of character stats, it's leverage stats. So our code leverage, right, it's maxed out because we're software engineers. Our media leverage, you can see it's about the 70% because it's the closest to actual coding, right? We have a lot of technical experience. We're adept at working with various technology. Most of the content we consume is through media. Most of our tasks that we perform is through media as well, be it our classes, be it the information we learn from, right? We're very familiar with using media. And we have more money than the average person. So when it comes to capital leverage, we're better off than the average person, right? Because only very certain niche specific majors or people would make more money than us, right? And of course, we have, last but not least, labor leverage. Now, when it comes to labor leverage, obviously we're lacking, and I'll get into the details later. Of course, as I mentioned, code is self-explanatory. I don't have to explain why, our coding bar is maxed out. We're software engineers. And our media leverage advantage actually comes from the ability for us to build and control digital platforms, think of Facebook, automate tasks, and understand how to reach large audiences online. Because how do you reach large audiences online? Well, it's the algorithm. And guess what? We spend years studying algorithms. As software engineers, we're very well versed with algorithms. It's something that comes natural to us. And as mentioned before, we make more money than the average person due to the nature of our job. And the only thing we really lack is labor leverage. But this is still contingent on the fact of what we did at our roles. For example, if we were, let's say, a manager like I was, I'll have a slight advantage in labor leverage over other people, right? But most software engineers aren't in managerial roles, so their labor leverage is lacking. And now you might be thinking, you're like, okay, we understand that you need all the leverages for entrepreneurship, and we know 9 to 5 isn't going to cut it, so we need to be entrepreneurs. But how do I get better at the leverages, right? Let's say if I'm really good at coding, how do I raise my stats for labor and, let's say, capital, right? How can I do that? Well, all forms of leverage actually have something very important in common, and that is persuasion and communication, right? They all originate from your ability to persuade people and communicate with people, right? And if you don't believe me, we'll go through it. And yes, even code. Creating impactful software is going to require you to coordinate and persuade other people to not only contribute to the project, but also to adopt it and actually use it. Getting others to work with you or for you is going to require effective communication and persuasion for them to join your team, right? Securing financial resources is going to depend on your persuasion and communication. And same thing with media, right? For you to create media that resonates with people, you're going to need strong communication and actual persuasion skills, right? Remember, persuasion and communication is the backbone of these leverages, right? They are at the heart of leverage. And since they're at the heart of leverage, that means they're the backbone of entrepreneurship in a sense, right? So we can make the assumption that if you hone your persuasion and communication skills, you will make an obscene amount of money. But there's obviously a caveat to this. It's not really as simple as, okay, I can just go learn persuasion and communication, I'll be a trillionaire. That's not how that works. There's a few steps we first have to follow. And the first step is for us to identify our unique advantage. And every single person in the world has a unique advantage, right? And these unique advantages manifest in 3 categories: location, experience, and network. So location is where you're located. Experience is what you experienced. This doesn't only have to be technical experience. This can be just life experience in general. And last but not least, who you know, so your network. And if you want to take a look at how I made my money, let me run you through it. So first and foremost, my location, where I'm located in LA. From my experience, what was I doing, right? What was my experience composed of? Well, from a technical standpoint, from a job standpoint, software engineering, right? I was a consultant as well, software engineering consultant for Fortune 500 companies, managed teams and so on, led multi-million-dollar projects, right? So that's what I had in terms of my unique advantage and experience. Not everybody would have the same experience as me. And in terms of the who, well, since I worked with many Fortune 500 companies, I got to know these people, right? I got to know the C-suite executives, I got to know the project stakeholders, and I even met some local business owners near me as well, right? Because due to the nature of my work. And in my case, when I took a look at my leverage, it was slightly different than a regular software engineer. So my leverage was, of course, number one, code leverage. That's what I excelled at the most. The second was actually labor leverage because I was in charge of other software engineers and I managed a lot of projects, right? And then it was media for me, and then it was capital, right? And what I did was I used my unique advantages, right? So where I was located, what experience I had, and who I knew to start a B2B consulting firm, right? And the main thing I did is I addressed problems that small and medium-sized businesses couldn't address due to not having an in-house data analytics team because it was too expensive. When I was working for these Fortune 500 companies, I realized that all of these guys have an in-house data analytics team. They're paying 6 figures for their data analysts. Small and medium-sized businesses can't afford that. So most of the time they're going to other businesses to get these services. And I thought, okay, I can be the service provider in my local area. And that's exactly what I did, right? I used my coding leverage to build AI and machine learning systems to analyze data, right? I used my labor leverage to hire contractors and C-suite executives to expand and run my business, such as the daily operations. I used media leverage, mainly in the form of webinars, to scale me to $551,000 this month, for the month of October, that is, which was actually the best month I've had to date. And I'm using capital leverage right now to reinvest the actual revenue I get from the business back into the business through various tools, software, and partnerships to give me a competitive edge over my competition. So if I were to kind of highlight everything and summarize this entire point of how you can make an obscene amount of money, it's the following. You'll take a look at your unique advantages, where you're located, right? What your experience is composed of, who you know, right? Take all that into account, understand your leverages, right? The 4 leverages we talked about: code leverage, labor leverage, right? Media leverage, and capital leverage, and order them like stats from a character, right? And then you want to take a look at a problem that you can solve, target the pain points of that problem, and create a solution that will actually alleviate that pain point. And from there, you will make a lot of money. And I know it sounds simple because it is simple, right? It's simple, but not easy, right? Of course, it's going to be hard, but 99% of it is pretty much going to be pain tolerance, to be honest with you. Most of it is just pain tolerance, but if you just continue through with it and tolerate that pain and resistance, you're going to get there one day. And that's what I want to actually emphasize here. Let me make this slightly bigger for everybody to see. But especially as a software engineer, and I'm going to say it again, we have an overwhelming advantage in business. That's why I urge every single software engineer to become an entrepreneur. And that's why I feel so strongly about software engineers not having an exit plan for their 9 to 5. Now, if you're in a startup and you're going to get equity, that's a completely different world, right? Because you actually have the 4 forms of leverage there. You're part of the business now. Your success is the business's success, and the business's success is your success. But if you're a regular 9 to 5 employee with no whatsoever exit plan, right, you will never be obscenely wealthy. If you don't want to be obscenely wealthy, if you don't want the finer things in life, that's completely fine. But I'm talking to the people who want the finer things in life, who want to buy the things they dreamed of buying in their childhood, who want to provide their family the absolute best in the world. And I'm telling you that it is possible. It's just going to require work. But it is simple. Not easy, but simple. So with that, please let me know if you enjoyed the video. Drop as many comments as you would like. And with that, I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you later.